Why did Aristotle say man is a political animal? Why did he say that if you live outside the society, you are either a beast or a god? Did he really justify slavery? Or maybe have we misunderstood him for more than 2000 years? And is it possible that he predicted the end of slavery altogether? Hello, everyone, and welcome to the channel. I am planning to release series, couple of episodes discussing, summarizing, outlining key ideas from Aristotle's Politics. This is a very famous book written on the political communities, how societies emerge, what kind of regimes are there, and how they can survive, what kind of regimes can survive in different kinds of situations, contexts, uh, and as well as practical advice for rulers, written by Aristotle. Aristotle probably never intended to release this as a separate book, as understood today in today's times when you talk about publishing books. Most likely, these were a collection of words that he taught in the lecture that was later on collected by students and then passed on over time as a collection of works basically written around politics and societies. And if you find this interesting, if you're curious about this philosophy, this specific kind of work, follow along, subscribe, like, share with your friends, and see where we are headed. Okay, before we start talking about politics, let's first talk about the philosopher himself and also historical context behind this work. Yeah, Aristotle was a very famous ancient Greek polymath. He was a scientist, but also a philosopher, because there wasn't such distinction back then in those times. So he was a very famous polymath. So he wrote on topics like ethics, science, philosophy, astronomy, metaphysics, rhetoric, biology, zoology. So almost all the known sciences and studies of his time. So he was born in 384 BC and died in 322 BC. That was a very hostile and maybe unstable period for politics in Greece. What do I mean by that? Is that this is a time when Alexander the Great unleashes his campaign of conquering basically the Near East. He conquers Greece and then Anatolia, Persia, Mesopotamia, Egypt, Caucasus, and even he reaches far back to the India, where he famously stops because his soldiers are tired. So in this context, you see all the old political orders established in ancient Greek city-states collapsing as a stable political systems. Athenian democracy is in crisis. Sparta is not the same Sparta that Plutarch later wrote about. So it's a very unstable period in politics and history. People don't know what to expect, what kind of new political systems should emerge. So it is in this context where Aristotle goes on a journey to discuss about politics, discuss about political communities, right from the beginning of why human beings come together to establish communities, to establish households, and then cities, villages, and what kind of regimes are there, and specific contexts, what kind of people need what kind of regime. One famous example is where he talks about why middle class is very important for the survival of democracy. So in a sense, it's very old text, but it has a lot of implications for today's world, today's politics, if you read it carefully. As I said, the insight that middle class is important for democracy was written more than 2000 years ago, and this is in today's times established as one of the functions of democracy, middle class, having a stable middle class. And Aristotle dedicates a whole book talking about what he calls a middling element in politics, in in making sure that polarization does not occur, ideological polarization does not occur if there is a strong centrist middling element. The book starts with a very famous claim saying, since we see that every city is some sort of community and that every community is constituted for the sake of some good, for everyone does everything for the sake of what is held to be good, it is clear that all communities aim at some good, and that the community that is most authoritative of all and embraces all the others does so particularly and aims at the most authoritative good of all. This is what is called the city or the political community. Perhaps here we should make a very broad claim before we go further into details about key Aristotelian logic that is very common in most of his works. Everything exists for an end. Nature does nothing in a vain. Everything has a purpose. Everything has an end goal. Okay, this end goal may not be very moral, it may be also immoral end goal, but this is basically how things exist. Of course, this is very distinct, this is very different than today's scientific worldview, understanding that it might not be the case that there is a purpose to everything, but this is key logic, Aristotelian logic. It's crucial to understand this viewpoint of Aristotle. So there is a purpose to everything that is being done. And politics, human communities, is no exception. If there is a city state, if there is a government, probably there is a reason for it. It did not just come out of blue all of a sudden one day. It did not fall out of the sky. There must be a reason for why it came into being at the first place. Then he says, okay, let's take a step back and let's see how things emerge before we go into talking about governments, politics, society, different political systems. Let's start from the beginning, from the 0 point. And let's see how things naturally develop from the beginning. Okay, then he makes the claim that male and female naturally gravitate towards each other so that they can produce an offspring. And that's natural that they do it because otherwise human species cannot survive. Then he makes a second claim. Okay, male and female get together for the species, survival of the species. But for the preservation of the communities, preservation of the society, then there is a ruling element and the ruled element in human beings that also emerges. So at one hand, male and female reproduction, and in the other hand, natural hierarchies emerge. So there is a ruling element and there is a ruled element in human psyche, in human body. And he makes this claim that body and a soul. Human being is composed of body and a soul. And soul rules the body. Body is basically what takes a physical action, but at the background, it is the soul that rules the body. So from the natural point of view, very starting point of view, these two things emerge. Male and female come together, and the ruling and ruled element is being established in all beings, in all human beings and also animals. Okay, what is the result of this? Two things coming together. Okay, households emerge where there is a free people and also what he calls as slaves. Free people meaning father, mother, children, grandfather, grandmother, master. So from these two things, first human society, let's call it households, emerge. Households are built for the needs of the daily life. Okay. But then several households get together. That ends up in village. Village is an extension of household. But then the complete community arising from village is a city. So we see natural progression. household built for the needs of a daily life because of very natural male and female coming together, then village, and at the end, city. Okay, what makes city different from the other communities? City is self-sufficient. It comes into being for the sake of living and exists for the sake of living well. City is natural end of community and it is complete. Why it is complete? Because it is self-sufficient. Within a city, different households, different villages can cooperate, can trade without going further limits of the city. So in a sense, city is a very self-sufficient. So one person does shoemaking, another person goes and teaches at school, another person makes bread, another makes person cooks, and everyone trades. Basically, that's it makes this community very self-sufficient. So as a result, city naturally is the final progression in human communities. First household, then village, and then city. And of course, here he probably references his time where ancient Greece was divided into several independent city states, and probably he calls it city state, where this city state has a government, has a military, has a borders, has a diplomacy, and everything that basically modern nation states have. And we can even substitute it for a nation state, but for the sake of argument, for the sake of originality, let's stick to city. Let's call it city state. But it's a very autonomous political entity with its government, army, and everything. Then we come into the one of the most famous and one of my most favorite passages, maybe not only in Aristotelian philosophy, but overall political philosophy. It goes with the following. From these things, it is evident then that the city belongs among the things that exist by nature, and that man is by nature a political animal. He who is without a city through nature rather than chance is either a mean sort or superior to man. So, what does this mean? What do we mean by man being a political animal? Let's recall what we said at the beginning, that according to Aristotelian logic, nature does nothing in a vain. Everything has a purpose. If there is something that exists, probably there was a purpose for it in the beginning. And only man among animals has speech and reason that lets him to build households, villages, and as a final end, cities. And human being does this as a natural progression because, as we said, male and female coming together as a household, and then it finally culminating in city, self-sufficient operational community. Okay, some animals have advanced in some respects more than the others, but only speech which man has, which serves goals such as anticipating, thinking, arguing, discussing justice, discussing science, discussing philosophy, and as a result of this capacity, they go ahead and build households, villages, and cities. All of this requires rational capacity, discussion, understanding, ultimately speech, logos, words. So this logos uh, is what differentiates humans from other animals, and that's why humans are ultimately political animals in that sense. So that's what he means by political animal. And if as a human being you don't need a city by your choice, you probably are not human being. You are either a beast or a god. He goes on to again explain that in every human being there's an impulse towards building such communities, building households, getting married, and then participating in politics. So he pretty much calls this as a natural progression of humanity, building cities, building political communities. And then he goes on to say that political community is a whole, and the human beings are the parts of it, in a way that fingers are part of human body. And if you cut the fingers out, fingers in themselves, will not function, will not have much of function. So he pretty much does not focus on individualism, but as a whole community, goals of a community, where he says that the best nature of human being is realized through living in a political community. Since it is natural that humans create these political communities, and the best human nature is realized in taking part in politics, taking part in society, community, building cities, building governments. Uh, and therefore, this is a natural part of progression. Why? Because city is a self-sufficient entity, and in that entity, you probably don't need to be specializing on every single thing. You don't have to be self-sufficient yourself, but you can rely on other human beings, your fellow human beings in that community. And there he makes this very famous claim. For if the individual, when separated from it, is not self sufficient, he will be in a condition similar to that of the other parts in relation to the whole. One who is incapable of sharing or who is in need of nothing through being self sufficient is no part of a city, and so is either a beast or a god. So, if you don't need a society, if you don't need to live with other human beings, if you don't need to cooperate with others, that probably means you don't have you can fulfill all your needs yourself, which is very highly unlikely in real scenario. And if you're able to do that, you are probably a beast or a god, meaning that you can fulfill all the things you need yourself without needing to trade with others, without needing to discuss with others, share your ideas, cooperate with others, build business, get educated, basically take part in society. So if you don't need any of these, you're probably not a human being. You are, let's call it superhuman. And of course, Aristotle makes this as not as a serious, but a parody, saying that if you don't need a society, you're probably not really a human being, probably. That much about the emergence of political communities and why it is considered natural by Aristotle that human beings create societies from household to village and ultimately to the cities, and why city is natural progression of communities. And then in a chapter 3, he then goes specifically talks about households, parts of the household, how what kind of components of this household is composed of. So every city is composed of households. And in a household, there are free people and slaves. Okay, before we go further to discuss about his ideas about slavery, let's also make a very give a very contextual information here. The time period that Aristotle lives is ancient Greece, where there is no industrialization. There are not technologies that we take it for granted today. There are no widespread use of machines, automation. So it pretty much relies heavily on physical labor, farming, construction, and basically physical services. So it's very slave-oriented economy, and you can see this in similar societies of that time, as not only ancient Greece but ancient India, ancient China, ancient other parts of Europe, Americas, and everywhere. There is this slave-oriented labor economy. So in a way, he's not trying to dismantle this organization, but he's trying to understand why this relationship emerged at the beginning, whether it is justified, and how can it be justified. So that's the context behind. So he is living in a time period where slavery is widespread. People, ordinary people, probably cannot imagine their economy without this component of slavery that existed. So then he says in households there are free people, and there's a what free people does is that they have property and they manage this property through household management. And he pretty much calls slaves as animate properties, animate possession of the, let's call it, master of his time. So there are free people and then the properties, and the slaves are included in this property. Before we go into further discussion, there is a very interesting insight that Aristotle gives that points out that maybe he foresaw beforehand the abolition of slavery. The time would come when the slave labor would no longer needed. So that's a very interesting passage that I'm going to read. Every subordinate, moreover, is an instrument that wields many instruments. For if each of the instruments were able to perform its function on command or by anticipation, so that shuttles would wave themselves and picks play the lyre, master craftsmen would no longer have a need for subordinates or masters for slaves. So he's saying that in this economy, if there was machines that could substitute physical labor, substantive physical labor, if there was automation, if machines already became widespread, then there would probably no need for slavery at all. So in a sense, he is pointing to a future where at some point in the future, it may be the case that slavery would no longer be needed. And he is linking it to industrial revolution. And if you look at history, there is actually correlation. There is partial truth here that, of course, we can't say industrialization caused the abolition of slavery. It was much more complex than that, but it sort of coincides with the rise of industrialization, automation, with the abolishment of slavery. In a sense that after the Industrial Revolution, societies no longer needed to rely on slave labor to maintain economies. And of course, it did not happen overnight, but this contributed to the end of slavery. So I find this insight very, very interesting, coming from more than 2,000 years ago. This guy living in a society dominated by slave labor, saying that, okay, in the future, pay attention, maybe there will be a time when probably there will be no need for slavery if everything can everything can be done in a machine, by the machines, or automation, basically. So that's very interesting to see that he's pointing to that future where there may be a situation, if certain conditions are met, there would be no need for slave labor. And that's what actually happened in the history after 18th century. Okay, that much about the historical future predictions by this Greek philosopher. Let's move on to the next part where he discusses why this hierarchy exists, what he calls master and slave relationship in his time. Okay, he says, let's start from again. Just like City's discussion, he says, okay, let's start from the beginning. Let's understand. Is this justified? Is this kind of hierarchical establishment, slave and master relationship, justified? Or is it very unjust that should be dismantled? Why this exists in the first place? Why societies establish hierarchies? So he starts by saying that almost immediately after birth, the thing that we discussed about ruling and ruled element emerges with certain people. Certain people gravitate towards ruling, and certain people gravitate towards ruled. Some people are more prone to take charge, lead others, give commands, but some people are more prone to receiving orders, following orders, obeying orders without questioning those orders necessarily. He gives a very simple example, like wild animals compared with the humans, tamed animals. Says all animals, humans included, have two parts, body and soul. Says it is advantageous if soul rules the body part, not the other way around. He says soul is a ruling element generally, and the body is ruled element. Very basic example. If you take a look at the human being, he says that, okay, this human being has a body and a soul. Soul rules the body. Body takes the physical action, but soul decides. Soul is a much more rational point of contact. It decides what this person should eat, what this person should discuss, what this person should argue, what this person should plan, what this person should decide. So, in a sense, in each human being and even in each animal, there is a soul ruling element and a body obeying element. That's a ruled element. And he says the following: For the soul rules the body with the rule of a master, while intellect rules appetite with political and kingly rule. And this makes it evident that it is according to nature and advantageous for the body to be ruled by the soul, and the passionate part of the soul by intellect, and the part having reason, while it is harmful to both if the relation is equal or reverts. The same holds with respect to man and the other animals. Tame animals have a better nature than wild ones, and it is better for all of them to be ruled by man, since in this way their preservation is ensured. So, so especially the last part is very crucial here. If they are preserved. So he's saying that in all these relationships should be mutually beneficial. So let's say, let's take a look at from animal rights example. So if you want wild animals to survive, tame animals to survive, the best way to ensure their survival is to make sure that they are ruled by people, rational beings, where ruling element is more visible, is more present. So in a sense, it makes sense for this hierarchy to exist. So wild animals have almost minimal ruling element, and then you have tame animals, and at the top of the hierarchy you have humans who are the most capable animals in terms of rational capacity. So in a sense, only human beings can understand rationally how, if they wish to preserve, how to preserve these wild animals. So in a sense, if wild animal wants to survive, wants their species to survive, they should follow this rational being, because they can decide for them what is best for them. So in a sense, this is not a domination relationship, ruling and ruled element. This is not about domination, but preservation, mutually beneficial relationship, and especially for the preservation of the ruled party here. You can take a very simple example. Let's say you have a friend who's very drunk, who drank a lot of, let's say, alcohol, but you care for that friend. But at that point in time, this person doesn't lacks the rational capacity to decide for himself or herself. So what you do is that you call a taxi for that person, you lead that person. So you make sure that this person follows your orders, goes to the taxi, you tell, hey, enter the car, follow what I'm telling you. So in a sense, you are helping that person, because that person lacks the rational capacity, lacks the ruling element. But you have that ruling element. So if you want that person to survive, actually that person should follow you, not the other way around. So that's why he's saying if it is equal, this relationship is destroyed. So he's saying that they should not be equal, but the ruling element should always rule the ruled element. And it goes back to this soul and body distinction that he gives at the beginning of the chapter. And here's the part of slavery starts. He says, accordingly, those who are as different from other men as the soul from the body, or man from beast, and they are in this state if their work is the use of the body, and if this is the best that can come from them, are slaves by nature. So he's saying that if there is such a big distinction between one human being and the other human being, in such a way between animals and human beings, or body and a soul, then it makes sense for this human being to obey the master. So in a sense, same example. In this relationship, their preservation can be maximized, because this ruling person with the ruling element, rational capacity, can decide for this other person, because they lack this rational capacity. So in a sense, he is not justifying slavery blindly, but he's saying that okay, let's take a look at the example. Let's see. There are two human beings. Okay, one understands world, one can decide, one has the rational capacity, but the other doesn't have it for whatever reason. In that sense, it makes sense for this second person to obey this first person, to follow their commands. It is not domination based relationship, but it is actually beneficial for them to follow. So probably I don't know if it's better to call this slave master slave relationship. Maybe he was claiming, maybe he was saying that okay, the slave labor economy that exists in ancient Greece is not justified as it is now, but it should be reformed in a way that they should be carefully selected who is master or who is slave. So probably that's the best explanation. That okay, he's not against slavery as a concept, but he's saying that its understanding of slave and master relationship is very flawed. It is not based on any rational understanding. It's just very random based on a chance. And of course, he talks about instances where very rational minded people oftentimes end up as slaves for whatever reason. And most likely because of domination, basically. Because stronger comes and says, hey, okay, you are my slave. Uh, do what I say. Otherwise, I will punish you with physical labor because I'm stronger than you. So he's pretty much against that kind of domination based relationship, saying it should be natural, consensual for to the both parties because it should be beneficial to both parties at the end of the day. So in a way, if you don't want to do anything else than physical labor, you should do physical labor and just obey the person that gives you orders. Of course, that's his claim, not claiming to justify any kind of forced command economy or anything. So, in summary, Aristotle wasn't really justifying slavery as it existed in history, but he was theorizing a system of natural hierarchy. He was saying some people lack rational capacity to govern themselves, and they actually benefit from being ruled because these people with the ruling element they use reason fully, while the other ruled person contributes via physical labor. It's a mutually beneficial relationship in his eyes. He would not justify slavery due to force or conquest because it was simply based on power manipulation, where you can easily have rational people ending up as slaves or servants. So, in a sense, he wasn't defending Athenian or very famous slavery based economy. He was making a deeper claim that some people, by nature, may lack the rational faculties needed for independent life. And because of this, they may flourish more under the guidance of a rational ruler. Again, think of the example that I gave, drunk friend versus sober friend, where sober friend basically in that specific scenario rules, leads that drunk friend. Okay, that much about the context of master and slave relationship. But then he goes into the other very interesting topic of his time. Okay, obviously, in ancient times and medieval times, it was a very common practice, and he saw it himself as well, that if a stronger nation, if stronger city states conquers another city state or another city, it was a common practice where they would take free people as slaves, as a war trophy. So it was a very common practice that was done by many political states by then, city states by then. Then the question is okay, what is just? Goodwill or the force of the superior? Is there a case to be made that virtue is always superior? And if someone is superior in force, then does that mean that it is supported by virtue? Is what is just the goodwill of the better or simply the rule of the stronger? Is it true that if you are stronger physically, militarily, that means you get the right to decide everything, subjugate others and everything? But here he makes the claim that military success or domination in general does not necessarily equal moral superiority. If I beat you in a war, I deserve to rule you is not correct because fundamentally, not all wars are just. Again, going back to the beginning, everything has a purpose according to Aristotle. But this purpose, this end, is not always moral. There will be a lot of cases where city states will declare war just for the domination, just for unjust reasons, immoral reasons. And if they go ahead and capture all those free people as slaves, it doesn't make sense. It is not natural that you go ahead and capture rationally minded people who may be minding their own business, who may be scientists, philosophers, artists, or just the common people who sell stuff, make shoes, make breads. But this is evidently what happens. If you take the argument that stronger is always the more virtuous, this argument is problematic because not every war has just beginnings. Yet at the same time, no one would assert that someone not deserving slavery but by their nature should be slave. But this will be the end, unfortunately, if stronger is always considered virtuous. But then he also criticizes the philosophers of his time. He says, okay, there are some philosophers who comfort themselves by saying that, those people that we conquer as Greeks are barbarians and barbarians are slaves by nature, so it doesn't matter if we take them as slaves. So, but he criticizes his claim, basically saying this is the argument that people make to comfort themselves. It's not based on any argument. So he's saying that if someone deserves to be a servant, it's not called slave, but let's call it servant by their nature, then there is actually going to be a mutually beneficial relationship between the master and the servant. Because again, slave or servant is considered part of master. So if it's part of master, uh, master should treat that servant very well because it's basically part of it. And this is another strong Aristotelian logic that part and whole, as we talked before, like every whole consists of some parts where if you cut the part out, the whole would not function. So it applies same here as well. So this relationship should be mutually beneficial. It should not be based on domination. But those who are not slaves according to this, but according to force, war gains, or convention, this will not be the case. So in a sense, he's saying that servant and master relationship should be beneficial and natural for both parties. But if this relationship is not grounded on reason, such as slavery gains from the war or conquest, then this relationship is not natural. And therefore, by this standard, most of the slavery that existed in his time and well beyond his time, more than 1,000 years, is not justified. Because this is not based on rationality or justice. It is based on conquest, prejudice, domination, and chance. So that much about his ideas about slavery. So in a sense, he wasn't strictly talking about really slavery, but he was trying to understand why natural hierarchies emerge. So in summary, his idea is that there is a ruling and ruled element, and natural hierarchies emerge naturally, but it is for the sake of both, because we need both parts, ruling and ruled element. We need both body and soul. It can't be the case where soul dominates the body. But in a way, it is more natural where soul guides the body, gives it a direct. So then he applies this to human beings versus human beings that has rationality versus those that lack it. And then tame animals, wild animals. So essentially, this comes from this first principle of soul versus body, where soul is the ruling element, body is the ruled element. Okay, that much about this part of the discussion. Then he makes a claim that not all ruling scenarios are the same in the following passage. It is evident from these things as well that mastery and political rule are not the same thing, and that all the sorts of rule are not the same as one another, as some assert. For the one sort is over those free by nature, the other over slaves, and household management is monarchy, while political rule is over free and equal persons. So he's saying that political rule is over free and equal people. So, in a sense, master and servant relationship does not work in political context. In politics, you rule over free people. But in master and servant relationship, it's basically master giving a command and then servant obeying it and doing it without any question. Because in that scenario, master has rational capacity, but the servant does not have it. In that scenario, it is justified. But in politics, you are trying to rule people, all of whom has the capacity for rational reasoning. They can decide, they can discuss about politics, they can argue what is justice, what is meaning of life, they can establish businesses, they can teach at university, they can make shoes and everything. So it is much more complex. This politics, that's why it's very much complex, because even though Aristotle believes in hierarchy, he doesn't believe in all rule is absolute. Political leadership requires persuasion, reciprocity, and consent, while mastery is one-sided command-based relationship. So not all rule is the same. Political life begins when citizens rule and are ruled in turn, not when one person dominates the other with the commands. So in a sense, it's politics is very complex business, because now you have to figure out a way to rule people who are free. You cannot deny them, you cannot remove their freedom. They are free and equal people. They're free and equal in relation to you. So you have to come up with a strategy to make sure that this community city survives in a way that you can also rule these people. So that's why he makes this distinction where ruling over servants is very, very different than ruling over free people. Second is much more complex. And it is no surprise that the rest of the book is pretty much dedicated to politics at city level as opposed to household or master servant relationship. And that basically summarizes what we were going to discuss today in this episode. We started with the Aristotelian understanding of how cities emerge, first households, then villages, and then cities. Households emerge because male and female gravitate towards one another. And then city is the final end as a self-sufficient community where all the needs of its households, its members are met. So that's the ultimate end goal for all communities, and best of human nature is realized in taking participation in this community. And that's why politics is not considered a dirty game, but actually a very virtuous activity, because now you're taking part in the most active uh, stage of human flourishment, because your actions is going to decide how this community functions and everything, which is going to affect all the people that are parts of this community. We also touched upon the topics on slavery. We understand that, okay, his understanding of slavery is much, much complex than the historical slavery that we know and we despise, rightly so, in the modern world. He's saying that, okay, if there is a case, if it ever happens that there's a difference between there are two people in terms of rational understanding, it is better for the ruled person to be ruled by the ruling person. So that's pretty much what he's making a claim about slavery. Of course, he doesn't try to make an argument about dismantling this institution of his time. Okay, we need to understand the context, as we said, of his time, but it's very, very complex. We can't make a single claim saying that, oh, Aristotle was just justifying slavery, and that's why slavery existed thousands of years. Actually, as it turns out, he would he was most likely against the slavery that existed in his time in the form of war gains, taking random people, selling random people, forcing them to work, and etc. So that's what we discussed today. In the next episode, I'm going to talk about the next final chapters of book 1, where Aristotle talks about another topic, economics. Talks about why commerce emerged at the first place, why there is a money, why people seek money, why even after some people are self-sufficient, they still pursue profit. What are the ethical ways of pursuing profit versus unethical ways of profit? Is pursuing of profit natural in a way that cities emerge? Because they are very natural. Cities emerge. So that's what we are going to discuss in the next episode. Basically, economic theory of how economics basically function in the city, first in household and then up to the city level. So if that sounds interesting, subscribe, follow, watch out for the next episode. I may release it after some time. If it sounds interesting, follow the page, follow the channel, check out my Instagram page as well, which has much more followers than this one. Uh, but this is much more humble, this channel that I have. But let's see. If you don't find it interesting, that's also okay. But yes, thanks a lot for following me. Thanks a lot for listening. I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.